All right, so today on The Explainer, we are diving into one of the biggest mysteries in history. How in the world were the Great Pyramids really built? We're going to dig into the amazing analysis from Al-Dahi and uncover the engineering secrets that made it all happen.
You know, whenever you bring up the pyramids, the first thing everyone asks is, how did they lift those giant stones? I mean, it seems impossible, right? It's like the one question that just hangs in the air. But here's the kicker. What if lifting the stones wasn't even the toughest challenge they faced? Not even close. The real genius, the stuff nobody ever talks about, happened way before they even moved the first block. So yeah, let's get into it.
All right, Section 1, Harder Than Lifting Stones. And that title is no joke. Because seriously, the biggest hurdle they had to overcome wasn't about building up. It was all about what they did on the ground first.
It's like before you can build anything tall and sturdy, you've got to have a perfect base. You can't just build a skyscraper on a lumpy mattress, right? So for the Great Pyramid, that meant they had to carve a massive, perfectly flat foundation, straight out of the bedrock on the Giza Plateau.
Get ready for this number, 900,000 tons. That is the insane amount of rock they think the Egyptians had to chisel away, by hand, just to make the ground flat. To put that into perspective, that's like moving around 45,000 cars. And that was just getting started.
Okay, so it's flat. Big deal, right? Wrong. It wasn't enough to just be flat. It had to be perfectly, and I mean perfectly, horizontal. We're talking about a 13-acre area. Think about it. If you're off by even a tiny bit at the bottom, by the time you get to the top, that mistake is going to be huge, catastrophic even. So how'd they do it without, lasers and modern tech? With something so simple, it's brilliant, an A-frame level. It's basically a big wooden A with a weighted string hanging from the top. Gravity never lies, right? So that string, that plumb line, always points straight down. They could use that simple fact to find a perfect level, and they just moved this little tool all across that massive area. Genius!
And the result of all that careful work? A foundation so precise, it's probably more level than the floor in your house. Seriously, we're talking an accuracy of just a couple of centimeters over that whole area. That level of precision is exactly why this thing is still standing after all this time.
Okay, so the foundation is perfect. Now what? Section 2, Shaping and Moving Mountains. Now, they've got to get the millions of stone blocks they need, and here's the catch. They had to do it without some of the most basic tools we can think of.
And this is where things get really mind-bending. Look at this timeline. The Great Pyramid was finished 1,000 years, a full millennium, before the wheel was even introduced to Egypt for things like transport. Let that sink in. The time gap between the pyramid and the wheel in Egypt is longer than the time gap between the wheel in Egypt and us right now. Insane.
So, no iron tools, no giant saws. How do you cut these massive blocks of stone? Well, they used this amazing little trick, basically using nature against itself. They'd cut these little slots in the rock, jam some dry wooden wedges in there, and then just pour water on the wood. The wood soaks up the water, expands, and that expansion force is so powerful, it literally cracks the stone right where they wanted it to. So clever.
All right, so cutting is one thing, but moving these blocks that weigh tons with no wheels? They used giant wooden sleds. And we know how they did it, because they left us a clue, a hieroglyph that shows their secret weapon. There's a guy standing at the front of the sled, pouring water on the sand. Just a little bit of water. It makes the sand firm, cuts down the friction like crazy, and suddenly, dragging these monster blocks becomes, well, not easy, but possible.
Okay, foundation's done. Blocks are cut and moved. Now for the main event, the part everyone's been waiting for. How do you get all that stone up there? How do you build something as tall as a 50-story skyscraper by hand?
This chart really puts it into perspective. Yeah, the Burj Khalifa in Dubai is way, way taller, but look at the weight. The Great Pyramid is about 10 times heavier. It's not just a tall building, it's a literal mountain of stone they built. So the real problem wasn't just getting high, it was lifting that unbelievable amount of mass, fighting gravity every single step of the way.
So, the theory you always see in movies is this one long straight ramp going up the side, right? Well, it sounds good until you actually do the math. For a ramp to have a slope that people could actually drag stones up, it would have to be over a mile long, a mile. It would have taken more material and more work to build the ramp than to build the actual pyramid. It just doesn't make sense. And that brings us to a much cooler and frankly more believable theory from a French architect named Jean-Pierre Houdin.
His idea, what if the ramp was inside the pyramid? He suggested they build a small ramp on the outside to get the base started, but then they built a spiral ramp like a corkscrew on the inside to get all the way to the top.
So why does this idea work so well? Well, for one, it's way more efficient, but it also solves another huge mystery, how they got those 70-ton granite blocks up to the king's chamber. Think about trying to carry a huge couch up a winding staircase. You use the corners to turn and pivot. Same idea. But here's the best part. It actually matches up with the science. Thermal scans from back in the 80s found this weird spiral-shaped empty space inside the pyramid, right where this internal ramp would have been.
Which brings us to our last section, genius that still inspires. Because all this ancient problem solving, believe it or not, it's still super relevant to us today.
I mean, sure, we have giant cranes and power tools now, but the fundamental problems of building something big haven't changed at all. You still need a solid foundation, you still need to get your materials to the site, and you still need to lift everything up, fighting gravity. Same problems, different tools.
And you can actually see echoes of their solutions in our own technology. Take our massive hydraulic cranes. They work because you can't compress a liquid. Well, guess what? That's the exact same principle the Egyptians used with their wet wooden wedges to split rock. They understood the physics of it. They were masters of using nature's own rules to do incredible things.
So, at the end of the day, the secret of the pyramids isn't aliens or some kind of lost magic. It's just human ingenuity at its absolute best. It's proof that you can solve seemingly impossible problems with careful planning, clever thinking, and just really paying attention to how the world works. It shows that being smart is always better than just being strong. And that kind of leaves you wondering, right? What impossible problems could we solve today if we thought more like a pyramid builder?